You're listening to Setting Course, an ABS podcast. Join us as we navigate the latest trends, developments, and challenges facing the rapidly evolving maritime and offshore industries. Catch every episode at www.eagle.org and podcast platforms everywhere. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm John Snyder, managing editor of Riviera Maritime Media, and I'll be your host. Seafarers serve as the backbone of global shipping. Over the last several years, they've come under increasing pressure with unprecedented changes brought about by COVID, the energy transition, and more recently, rising geopolitical tensions. Today on Setting Course, we're going to discuss the changing role of the seafarer and how the industry needs to evolve to support the next generation of mariners. Joining us today to discuss these topics are Chuck Kemper. Chuck is Senior Vice President and Chief Human Resources Officer at ABS, and Jennifer Harrison. Jennifer is Senior Director of Learning Strategy at ABS. Chuck and Jennifer, welcome to the show.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, John.
Chuck, why don't you get us started? Tell our listeners, what are some of the pressures being faced by modern seafarers?
John, we've certainly seen two huge themes over a number of years now, and that is in the space of advancing digitization and technology changes, and then the drive on decarbonization and sustainability. So those are two big market drivers that are out there that are and will impact jobs more and more. But then day to day, you also have the regular strains on the seafarers, which we've seen some escalation of recently. The Mission to Seafarers publishes a report on Seafarer Happiness Index, and that report showed a marked drop last year. Tying it back to things that we saw in 2023, you saw piracy issues, you saw the terrorist attacks, increasing mental health issues following the COVID stuff. And while seafarers are waiting for more and more connectivity back to families, which is getting installed, many still lack access. So the isolation, the mental health issues that have been out there for seafarers is still there. And at the same time, their jobs are now being challenged a bit with some of these new technologies that are coming on board. So they're now being asked to learn new things about new technologies, whether that's in alternative fuels, whether that's in the control systems, autonomous working of vessels, autonomous functionality for different things. The bridge is changing, the engine room's changing. Lots of things are changing. And so in one sense, that's great that it gives them the opportunity to learn some new things and get maybe some excitement in their job. But it also is change, and change is stressful.
And Jennifer, do you have anything to add to what Chuck said?
Yes, thank you, John. It's interesting because I recently spoke with an engine manufacturer talking about these changes that are coming to the seafarers. And it was interesting because he said, they're not just joining ships now, they're going to be joining spaceships. And what he meant by that was that the technology that they're going to have to learn, to Chuck's point, is so vastly different and unnerving to them that it is creating this sense of anxiety because they know it's coming. And referring back to the happiness index that Chuck mentioned, I noticed that training in particular was one of the key measures that dropped significantly in the last quarter. So I do think it's a sign of that building anxiety and nervousness and uncertainty that's coming with these changes.
So lots of pressure, not only from the fact of isolation, perhaps from the lack of connectivity, but also pressure in regards to the new technologies coming in and the training required to deal with that new technology. Now, Jennifer, how are the roles of mariners and offshore workers evolving to meet this rapidly changing maritime landscape?
Well, it's interesting, John. What you're noticing is it's not just about the new technology skills that they're going to have to learn. It's kind of changing their entire mindset in a way. They have to develop these same skills that we're talking about for shoreside staff, right? More resilience to change, growth mindset attributes. And as you take a look at some of the research out there, and what you're finding is that the decision-making responsibilities are also changing. So with the new technology, the seafarers may find that they now are more responsible for making onboard decisions than they were perhaps with the current existing technology. So it changes not just the skill set, but the entire role that they could find themselves on board when this new technology comes along.
And Chuck, what are your thoughts on that?
I think what you're going to see is this huge shift change coming where you have the current available market of seafarers that are out there. You've got the future demand. You've got retirement ages as part of this calculation. And then you've got new blood coming into the profession. Those numbers are not adding up very well for the future of talent in the seafarer arena. So there's going to need to be focus on, and there is, I mean, I'm not saying, the industry is bereft of all of this, but the amount of attention that's going to need to be on attracting folks in and getting people up to speed technically, as well as all of these other components we're talking about, which people might call in the soft skill space or in their mental acuity toward certain things in the resilient space, in adapting to this type of lifestyle, testing, evaluating, assessing people for this lifestyle, and then pumping them full of the skills that they need for it is going to have to happen in quite an accelerated fashion when you just lay out the numbers that are ahead of us. So I think that there is, it's almost beyond the word evolution. I mean, it's more of a rapid facing change that we're up against in the industry.
And what kind of numbers are we talking about when you mention attracting the new generation of mariners?
Well, there was a report by BIMCO that said that there's another almost 90,000 officers needed by 2026. 90,000 officers by 2026. That's a massive number because you think of what it takes to going into becoming an officer. I mean, this is not somebody you hire off the street and have them, up and running in 6 months as an officer. This is intensive. It's long. It's experience. It's training. And of course, there's all of the other qualifications. You can't just train anybody. It has to be somebody, again, suited for this type of lifestyle, willing to venture into this type of lifestyle, because it's not for everybody.
Right. And so how's the industry going about attracting this new generation?
You are seeing concerted efforts, even governmental efforts, to attract people into the industry. For example, the Singapore Maritime and Port Authority has put an emphasis on attracting more people into the industry. And they're looking at a number of different programs and approaches to doing that. There's going to need to be more of that governmental intervention, or at least intervention that involves coalitions of people in the industry, organizations in the industry, to attract people in a way that we have to kind of drop the competition a little bit and say, hey, we're all in this game and that we all need seafarers. I know we compete against each other for talent, but we are all facing this dilemma. We need more. We need more officers. We need more seafarers. So I think there needs to be some more concerted efforts that are joint in nature, and perhaps it's even joint governmental and private-public partnership types of efforts to attract people in. But you can't just attract them in. Then there is the whole development process. There's the training process. So, I mean, perhaps it should even extend into that space of having public-private partnerships in the training and technical skills building area as well.
Right. And of course, we're talking about dealing with, for decarbonization, dealing with new engines, new systems. You mentioned digitalization, Chuck. Also, of course, new fuels, looking beyond fossil fuels to low and zero carbon fuels. So all that going to have to be addressed, certainly in training and regulatory changes and guidelines as well. Jennifer, I was going to ask you now, how are we preparing this new workforce for these future technologies?
Well, John, listening to Chuck right now talking about recruitment, it also made me think how training can play a role in this too, because it provides an opportunity to make the maritime industry seem a little more cool than perhaps it has, not so outdated and antiquated. And the training technologies that are coming on board now is one of the opportunities to do that. So if we start looking at the technology such as simulations and especially virtual simulations, that gives people an additional way to stretch and learn and practice that we haven't always had in the maritime space. And I think that's one thing that we really need to look at as we help them evolve to learn, is that because they have to learn so much in such a short span of time, the programs perhaps need to be looked at a little bit differently. Instead of just attending a course for a week, turn it into a longer, more structured program that gives them time to learn. And it's going to take the industry to give them that space and that time to learn. And it's going to give people like ourselves that build the training to work together, like Chuck said, to partner, where maybe they take a virtual simulated training that's then partnered with an actual physical simulator. So we can blend our technologies together and make it a more holistic training experience, much like we would give our own employees here in ABS when we're training them and upskilling them into new competencies.
Completely agree with Jennifer. We've had so many discussions about the simulation arena when it comes to training, and whether that is simulation at the bridge level or in the engine room or any component or aspect of the vessel, to venture into this virtual world, either in a physical virtual world where you're doing it in a simulator that is physical in nature, or whether you're doing it in a virtual simulator in the immersive environment through one's computer. Both of those are needed. Both of them serve slightly different purposes in skills building, but both are needed. And given the complexity of the systems that people are up against now, doing it in a virtual space rather than on an actual vessel is going to be needed. People are going to need to get thoroughly tested and thoroughly understanding how to do these things before they're put into a world where there can be a lot of danger. Understanding these things, how they are controlling, how they're navigating, understanding the new fuels and some of them that can have some new dangers that they bring on board. That's going to be critical. And so we want to exploit the virtual world, the simulated world, as much as we can to get people thoroughly competent before they go and do it live.
Now, how is ABS supporting the training of the future workforce?
Well, John, I can tell you that here internally in ABS, we're already working towards that. So we are building virtual environments because it really stresses what Chuck just said. Through the virtual environment, you can build a safer reality, and you can give them any sort of situation and scenario to practice against. So we're preparing that internally for our own staff and exploring options for how we can partner with industry and bring it to industry at large to help operators that don't have those kinds of resources to build such things for themselves, so that we can work together and solve this global recruiting and technical training challenge that's facing the industry.
And Chuck, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, we certainly are building things that largely in the past, our training has been more focused on the shore side, but we believe that some of the things that we are doing will have a greater impact on the seafarers themselves. So we see ourselves in a position, given the investment that we are making in immersive learning, simulated space learning, as something we will be able to extend into all of the skills needed on the seafarer side as well. And we have done seafarer training at times in the past, but we think that world is going to be so important. As we've modeled, for example, a ship in 3D space, and we have tasks taking place in that space for the kind of roles that our people serve in, the surveyor roles, we can do the same with those that have to perform actual operations, maintenance, and navigation of the vessel as well. So I think that world is going to be increasingly important. It will provide both a safe and an accelerated approach to training. And we firmly believe that the things that we are building will be able to extend directly into seafarer training.
Now, seafarers, of course, also play a key role in decarbonization. There's a certain level of buy-in that's needed to ensure that these new systems optimize both energy efficiency and, of course, fuel savings, etc. What do you see the support in that area?
John, taking a look at it, I don't think the training for that is significantly advanced in the marketplace right now. if I look back over my maritime career, I was once a personnel manager before I joined ABS. And my job was to find the qualified seafarers to get them out to the assets. And it was what I feel was a much more simple job than the task that's facing the crewing managers and personnel managers of today, because there's going to be a larger gap. You can't just rely solely on the mandatory training that's going to come in. There is a higher burden, in my opinion, on the operators to make sure that they're thoroughly training their employees in those new fuels and those new technologies to get that level of competency. And it's certainly not saying anything against the mandatory training, but they have to have a greater level of familiarization with the technology or the retrofits or the selections that are being made for that specific vessel. So I can definitely see that there is a broader knowledge base that's going to be necessary. And it's not necessarily going to always come with just that mandatory training. There needs to be personalized familiarization and operational safety training that's specific to each vessel and the equipment and technologies on board.
And how about you, Chuck? What's your insight on that?
Yeah, John, Jennifer is spot on. She's watching the space carefully, and we don't yet know all of the impacts that all of these things are going to have on operations, maintenance, with the vessel. So, for example, there's a lot of research happening right now on things like ammonia and having ammonia on board. And what is that going to change? And while there are vessels being built that will be ammonia fueled, at the same time, there's a lot of work happening to say, how does this change the safety regimen, the everything around the usage of this fuel, both on board, bunkering, everything potentially associated with a new fuel like that. So that is an active area of research. There's a lot of looking at human factors and what is going to change relative to ergonomics, human movement on board as technology changes, as new fuels come on board. Batteries and lithium and things like that haven't normally been a concern of folks on board a vessel are now going to be an issue. How are those looked after, monitored, cared for, ensured that they're safely maintained as well? So lots of questions that are still out there, lots of great research that's happening. That research is going to move from the space of the technical use of these things, but now the human beings that are in and around these things. How does it impact them? So I'm happy to say that I am aware that there's a fair amount of research being done in that space. So I believe that the industry will be able to have the technical knowledge to do it. And then it's a matter of how do we transmit that knowledge into the hearts and minds and daily practices of all the folks working in and around it.
Now, one of the topics we haven't yet touched on is improving the quality of life for mariners. What should the industry be doing to improve work conditions and the working environment for seafarers?
That list is really long, John. Let me just highlight a few things. As you look at the current dialogue in this space, the kinds of things that you hear about, mental health, connectivity on board, and particularly access to family through connectivity. You hear about shore leave. You hear about duration at sea. You hear about pay. You hear about overwork and stress, and some of that is related to the fall off in the labor force after COVID. A lot of folks left this profession and have not returned. So, there's different answers for each one of those. And then you stack on top of that what we've seen this past year with terrorist attacks. And so anyone operating in in that part of the world has had a whole new stress level, which could lead to being detained in a port. It could lead to being actively attacked while you are at sea. And of course, piracy continues. Piracy risk is always out there. So all of those things combined create a certain level of stress and impact the mental health and the level of motivation and engagement. And when you start to impact someone's level of engagement on board, you get into risks of safety, because we know from decades of research around employee engagement that safety is one of the most highly impacted areas by low levels of employee engagement. So you run the risk, if you're not addressing all of these things about the environment in which the individual is performing and operating every day through great leadership and listing these lists of unhappiness factors that the Mission to Seafarers, for example, studies, then you're also going to start to risk creating space for folks to behave in an unsafe manner. We just know that folks that are at the lower end of the engagement scores are more likely to do something that is not in alignment with the rules that they've been taught. For a number of different reasons psychologically that occurs, but it is a reality. So addressing all of these factors and impacts, and moreover, just putting them under great leaders on board, people that are truly looking out for their best interests, people that are making the expectations very, very clear, people that are taking advantage of the strengths of the individual, letting them know that they have their back, letting them know that they're important, giving them new opportunities and challenges as much as they can. All of those things can lead to higher levels of engagement and perhaps even overcome some of the other external factors that are impinging upon the situation. But certainly we need those leaders on board keenly aware of mental health issues. If I had to pick an area to train anybody in a supervisory role on board a vessel, it would be in how to have the right check-in conversations and recognition ability to see when someone is suffering from a mental health issue, and figuring out ways to intervene in that, figuring out ways to get them help, to support them through the voyage or even when they do go ashore. That level of conversation may seem really soft and fluffy for what is a tough industry, but wow, it can make a huge difference. And I know for a fact that it can make a huge difference. And that applies to any human being. I don't care how tough someone's expected to be in their job. Having a leader who can identify those things and then act on it can make a massive difference in the health of the individual as well as their overall performance.
Now, Jennifer, you went to sea. Can you provide us with some of your insight?
John, I have to say what Chuck just said really moved me. It's been years since I sailed, but not only did I sail, I was in the crew purser department, and it was our role to look after the 2,000, 2,500. I was on cruise ships, seafarers that were there with us, and that mental health was a daily challenge. And just by changing, not that the leadership is poor, but by starting to treat the way we lead on board and train on board and make it more the same comforts and securities and psychological safety and everything that we're putting into our shore-based staff, and making it less of a divide between how we treat our shore-based staff and our on-board staff, I think would make a huge difference. Creating that zone of safety, knowing that people care, putting that level of just check-ins, like Chuck said, would really go a long way, because it is a long job. It's a stressful job. There's always concerns about rest hours. So that ability to feel things more deeply and break is really there for a lot of the seafarers. So I definitely felt what he said and agree 100% with his approach.
Do you feel there's a bit of hesitation to address mental health?
I'm inspired by what I'm seeing out there now. I'm really seeing task forces come together. I'm seeing more articles and researches and movements in the industry to really start to address this. So I think there is a movement taking place right now in the maritime industry that is inspiring to me. So I believe that it can happen, and people are doing the right things to get us where we need to be to make life on board better for the seafarers.
Now, with only a few minutes left in our podcast, I was wondering if you both could share some key takeaways for our listeners. Chuck, do you want to start us off?
Sure, John. I want to applaud those ship owners and operators that are taking measures to improve the well-being of their staff, of their seafarers, of their officers. There are definitely ones that are doing a lot of great work in this space. As an example, I won't say who, but the last time I was on board a ship was a vessel that was in dry dock in Brazil 2 months ago. And that vessel was there because it was undergoing an electronic overhaul. And speaking to the advancing digitization in the industry, this was a ship that had just had an installation of all new electronic hardware only about 3 or 4 years ago. So that speaks to how rapidly things are changing. But the thing I wanted to comment on relative to this was that part of this overhaul was about increasing the connectivity for the seafarer. So it did include satellite link-up technology to allow the seafarers to get some of that greater connectivity. So, I mean, it's a tactic, it's a cost, but it is something that can positively impact them. So I commend those ship owners that are spending the money to make life a little bit better for their people. I also commend the ones that have taken on the training, both the technical training as well as the supervisor type of training to help them become better leaders of people at sea. There are definitely companies that are doing that. There are definitely companies that are investing in some of the simulation arena that we talked about, the virtual learning space that we talked about. So all of that is necessary. And I think those are the ones that are going to come out ahead in this war for talent that we are definitely up against in the whole seafarer arena. So what we need, though, is more. We need more companies taking up this charge and looking at this a bit longer term than just how am I going to complete this next voyage with the proper amount of seafarers. It needs to be a longer term view, and it needs to be a longer term investment. And perhaps the answer is in coalitions or the bringing together of public-private partnerships to look at some of these issues a little more broadly. Maybe that's regional, but in whatever manner it is, to look at the gap in skills, the gap in well-being, and figure out how we can get there together. As of course, we all have to compete against each other for talent, but can we create a new pool that meets some of these needs where we know we have huge gaps facing us in the future, and we have huge skills gaps facing us in the future, given the changes that are occurring?
And how about you, Jennifer? What are your key takeaways?
One of my key takeaways from a training perspective is, and it kind of ties back into this whole well-being concept, is to train people in a way that really builds their confidence. Make it more than just a check in the box. Hey, we sent this person to this training. They are now qualified. Because when you make them confident in what they're doing, that also then will make their life on board better. So it is a longer term process to upskill in these new technologies. And I do agree with Chuck that the partnership method, the coalitions that he said, is a great way to get us there, because if we can partner together, we can bring these solutions to the industry much more quickly than if we all try to do it individually on our own. And because it is such a heavy lift for the operators, they're going to need people like ABS and others that support them and service them to help them get there. It's a large challenge, and it's going to take all of us working together to help make it happen, in my opinion.
Jennifer and Chuck, thank you so much for joining me on Setting Course.
Thank you, John.
Been our pleasure. Thanks, John.
Thank you for joining us today on Setting Course, an ABS podcast. If you're interested in learning more about today's topic or listening to more episodes, visit www.eagle.org.